Hi, my name's Stephanie Davies. I'm the founder and CEO of Laughology. We are a learning and development company with a little bit of a difference. We're passionate about humour, not because it's just nice to have. It helps us think better, learn better and work better. And over the last 20 years, I've studied humour. My background's in stand-up comedy. I'm also a psychologist and I studied the psychology of humour a few years ago at the University of Chester. This session is all about banter. And the reason why I've come to this topic and started to talk to people about It's Only Banter is because I'm for one, passionate about banter and laughter and humour. But the second part is things are changing and we're starting to feel that push and pull. And so I wanted to explore the topic, what we can, what we can't say, why we're offended and should we be offended. So this topic, all about It's Only Banter. Why now? Well, we are working with over 5 generations in any workplace, from people who are as young as 16 right through to people who are really experienced and older in the workplace in their 70s. That means there is a little bit of a disconnect and a change in culture, in boundaries, in language. It's not wrong, it's not right, but it is different. And some of those differences can cause those tensions. I want to first start by looking at laughter and humour because I am a big fan and we do not want to lose banter. It's the core of who we are as human beings. Laughter is a communication tool. It's really important. It matters for us as social connections, as bonds, to help relieve tension. Humour is a little bit different. And this is where we get a bit stuck sometimes because humour is quite subjective and objective. And there's so many things that link into what we feel about humour. And humour is a way of looking at the world, but it's also a really unique tool that we have as human beings to be resilient, to look at things differently. If you just think about some of the biggest challenges in your life, think about COVID. We weren't laughing at the situation or at some of the challenges that went on, but some of the absurdities of human behaviour, toilet roll being a thing of gold dust. Who thought that? All these things are what makes us human, so we don't want to lose this. The other thing, from a commercial and workplace point of view, why should we care? Because it sits at the very heart of culture. And we also know that it increases the way we work, how we feel about work. It also increases productivity, but it can do things like make connections and increase sales. All these things are important. So if we are talking about banter, what would you say it is? Let's look at banter a little bit more. So if we look at banter, what it means is something that's said that's funny, it's not serious, it's in jest. But what it's not is when it's singled out to harm an individual or to use it as a way to single someone out and make fun of them. So we need to think about what needs to be considered because it's a really fine line, isn't it, between offence and humour. And because I talked about before, humour is subjective and objective, what are those things that we need to consider? And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. And one of the things I often say is, do you actually have a right not to be offended? Now, I am being deliberately provocative here. And the reason why I say that is because the world is so different. The world is made up of so many different things that do we actually have a right to not be offended? Because what I might be offended at, somebody else might not be because of the way I've been brought up or my belief systems. Also, offence gives us a route to examine and to look at things differently. And furthermore, offence is a feeling. But when we look at it for workplaces, we do need to consider it. So things that we need to consider are individual life experiences, things like belief systems, culture, religion, post and past and current experiences. And how do you know all that from just looking at an individual? How do you know what you can and can't say? So we end up saying things like, oh, you can't say anything anymore. Now that's not true. The world has changed, and for the right reasons. There are certain things that we learn about all the time. And like I said, there's 5 generations in workplaces. It means that perhaps the generation over here and the generation over here have got a different way of explaining stuff. or they've lived through different times and therefore different things were acceptable. And because we are learning and changing all the time, that means we have to look at helping people to understand how we navigate this time without making those different ways of thinking even more separate. Because the world is so divided at the moment. This is about how we pull people together, not separate them. The other thing to consider and to be aware of is we are in workplaces. And there is a difference between a comedy club and a workplace or a pub environment or being out with your friends. And it's really important to consider then the protective characteristics. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see them on the screen now. And these are the things that we need to be aware of. And there is new laws coming in all the time and changing. And being aware of those laws and what that means for you in a workplace as a manager and as a leader. If somebody has said that they're offended, or if somebody has said that they feel like one of their protected characteristics was something that was at the brunt of banter, this is something that will be taken seriously. So we do need to look at those protected characteristics, and we do need to look at how the law has changed. That it's not enough just to say, okay, we spoke to that person. We have to actively have done something to educate, to help people to understand why those differences are there and why sometimes language can offend. But that's not to say that we can't challenge it. And we'll come on to that a little bit later, and that we can't say anything anymore. It's about being aware and also leaning into that and going, okay, let me learn something rather than separating. How do we bring it together? Because there is a real key difference between banter and bullying. Banter can be used sometimes to say, actually, I don't mean it. It's only banter. It's you, it's not me. And the minute you have to say that, it's not banter. So the things I'd really encourage you to discuss in your workplaces and consider is the power dynamics, the cultural differences. And what I mean by power dynamics is, look, I might have a really good relationship with one of my team members who's been around in my team for years, and we have really good banter together that sometimes could be observed as crossing the line. And that's the key. Even if it's observed, then we have to be careful, because that observation might mean something to somebody else, and that they might think that that's okay because they've observed it. So those power dynamics are important, but also how you're saying it to somebody if there's a hierarchical status, and things like the history and historics of cultural challenges and historics of shared experiences, so things around racism and cultural differences. That might be something that you're not aware of, but somebody else might find it a bit different or offensive. That's why in workplaces, this is something that we do need to consider. I'm not going to go through them all, but the other one that I'd really like to point out is the difference between intent and impact. Now, you might not intend to offend somebody, and that's real key, but it does not negate the impact. However, if the intent isn't there, that's when you should go, okay, how can I learn about this? How can I explore this differently? There might be a cultural difference. That can be really hard to hear, especially as somebody who thinks they're quite inclusive and this is who I am and part of my story. Actually, that doesn't mean that it was the right thing to say. So how do we challenge in a positive way and create cultures where people can have a laugh, and also where we bring people together rather than create that divisiveness that is happening all over the world, because there's too much of that. So let's use it as a way to explore rather than to say, that's it, like we can't say anything. And this is a lovely little model that we'll explore further in our bigger workshops called the 3Ds. It's about how we challenge in a direct way, how we disarm, but also what we decide to do next. So let's take direct at first. Now, before we even challenge, quite often there might be a pause moment. And the reason why I say that is because quite often we might have heard something in the moment and it'll link to our own experience. That will ignite a feeling, and then we'll challenge based on that feeling rather than a perspective that's objective. And so that pause moment just allows you to go, okay, do I need to speak to somebody about it? Is it something that I'm feeling? And how do I directly challenge this in a positive way? And to really think about why you're challenging. By the way, that's not to say that we shouldn't. It's just how do we do it in the most constructive way where we take people with us rather than push them away. And that is one of the ways that we can help to bring people together. So when we are directly challenging, use phrases like I, or things like perhaps I just want to talk to you about, or when I heard this, this is how I felt. Is that what you meant? It's a really good clarification. And what it means is you're directing it at you rather than the other person. That also leads into the disarm bit, that you might even say to somebody, shall we talk about this further? This might feel a little bit difficult, but I just want to express how I feel, and then I'll listen to you. That listening part is really important, because often we just want to tell people and that's it and walk away. This is what you made me feel like. This is part of who I am. And that's okay. But does it ever bring somebody with us? And the idea of this is, how do we educate, explore, and navigate this challenging way of thinking together? So that disarm bit is really, really important. And exploring that further would really help as a collective team and as a group. And by the way, this isn't about then just saying, oh, it didn't mean anything, it was only small, or oh, I didn't mean it in that way. Because sometimes we can use passive aggressiveness, if that's the word, as a way to get out of things, but really that's just a microaggression. And again, people use that as a way to go, oh, you can't say anything anymore. That's just a new phrase. It's not. A microaggression is when we cover it by something that might be seen as normalized, or, oh, I meant it in a positive way. For example, it might be saying something about somebody's culture. Oh, because you were born like this, that must mean you were really good at this. It's like grouping people, and even if it's a positive, it's still not right, because it feeds into a greater narrative that is unhelpful about everybody from that culture's like this, or if you were born like this, that must mean you are like this. And actually, diversity and difference, as we know and as we start this conversation about, is why sometimes we get offended. So actually, those differences are something that we all have, no matter what culture we're from. So it's not about using those small things and getting away with it. Actually, microaggressions are a real thing. And if you think of them like, I heard a brilliant phrase, it's like little mosquito bites. And you might get one and it's okay, but if you get lots of them all the time, and if you're somebody perhaps from a particular culture or even a particular sex, even as a woman, that you get that all the time, it suddenly becomes wearing and quite exhausting. For example, I often get asked about, am I actually the CEO of Laughology? And people raise an eyebrow because I don't look like a CEO. What does that mean? I don't know what I'm meant to look like. And if you've done all this and you've had the good conversation and you've tried to bring that person along with you, decide what you want to do next. The decision is the important part. Is it something that you want to progress? Has it been an intentional blur? Has it been an intentional thing that somebody said? Have they said it again once perhaps you've had a good conversation with them? And then decide on what you want to do next. And that decision might be, I want to take it further, or that decision might be, do you know what? I'm okay with that. That's how they are. We've had a conversation. I've understood where they're coming from. And I think we've got somewhere. And that's okay. We can move forward together. For me, that's the best way. But I would always come back to, if in doubt, don't say it. We are in workplaces. Things have changed. Things are changing. You have to hold your hand up and say, perhaps that wasn't the right thing to say. Maybe I didn't mean it, but perhaps I wasn't aware of the challenges behind that person and what they've put up with. So if in doubt, don't say it. And if you do say it, then have some allyship. Hold up, say sorry, or just say, it was not what I intended. Thanks for telling me about it. It's noted. Or let's have a conversation. Because true allyship is calling out language in the moment. It's not emails, signatures on the bottom. It's really standing up and saying, actually, that wasn't banter, that's bullying. Or that microaggression, that's not helpful. And really supporting how we move forward together. Not saying let's cancel people, not saying I want them sacked, not saying I don't like that person because they said this or they deliberately offended me. Sometimes those things can be true, but really saying how can we move forward together, educate, explore, and recognise we have some beautiful differences. So actually, sometimes we might be offended. Is that okay? And really challenging yourself to think about it.